You know, I've always been fascinated by the dubbing of foreign language films into English, especially the Asian languages, because given the different structures of the language, all those little particles hanging off the ends of sentences, it makes a real challenge for the dubber to match the dialogue to the lip movements of the actors. I first became interested in the subject when I was a kid with that first generation of cartoons that came in from Japan. Speed Racer, Prince Planet, Astro Boy, you remember. Some of you remember anyway. And if you remember, you also remember the way the dialogue went. It was always spoken very fast, and the characters would always add strange sounds at the end of their sentences in order to match those particles, so you'd come up with something sort of like this. "Well, Spritle, I wonder what you're doing hiding in the trunk of the Mach 5. But somehow they always managed to end up with their mouths open at the end of the sentence. I'm not sure if I can actually do that. "I wonder what you're doing hiding in the trunk of the Mach 5. Something like that. But the dubbers of the Japanese cartoons really didn't have that difficult a job, because Japanese animators in those days didn't pay much attention to actually synchronizing the lip movements to the dialogue. The characters would start flapping their mouths when the line began and would stop flapping as soon as the line was over. It was a lot more interesting in the live-action films, where you had real people speaking real words. Now, what really cinched my interest in dubbing of live-action was the old TV series Johnny Sacco and His Flying Robot. That's the one known over in Japan as Giant Robo. I remember watching that as a kid. There was an episode where a mad scientist has been turning human beings into zombies called Lugomen. And Johnny sneaks up to his little clinic in the hills and peeks through the window just as the scientist has finished one of the conversions. And the scientist looks triumphantly at his new creation and he says, "You are now a Lugoman. You will fight human beings all the time now." But the real classics when it comes to dubbing were not the Japanese imports, but rather the Chinese kung fu films. When I was in college, there was a theater just down the street that showed 3 movies for $1 twice a week. Being a student, being broke, being a cheapskate, I saw every one of them. And every one of them was a kung fu movie. So I had a first-hand education, not in college, in the theater, I mean. And I had a wonderful education in how to dub foreign films. Now we got to remember that it's only been the last few years that dubbing Asian motion pictures into English has brought in any kind of money. The process before was strictly a low-rent way of trying to pick up a couple of bucks. Consequently, the budgets were extremely low and the casts were extremely small. Most kung fu movies, I wouldn't be surprised if they were dubbed by 2 people. Maybe they were all dubbed by the same 2 people. There would be one guy doing all the men's voices, and there would be one woman doing all the women's voices, and because these were kung fu films, she never had much to do. At any rate, these films have stayed in my memory because of the dialogue, as well as the action. Some of the dialogue written by those anonymous scribes, I like that word, scribes. Some of that dialogue is of an unforgettable artistic quality. I think that probably the artistic drive behind the creation of the dialogue in the old kung fu movies was an utter contempt for the material. Now, I'm not saying that everyone who worked on an English language version of a kung fu movie hated the material. Some of them probably had genuine artistic feelings about the material. They felt they were laying the ground for their future career. They felt they were paying off the car. At any rate, I would like to share with you some of my favorite lines of kung fu dialogue. beginning with that one where the hero has just rescued the heroine from a gang that's out to get her. After polishing a number of them off, he hauls her out of town. She doesn't know what to make of him. She's afraid of him, doesn't know if he's friend or enemy. So she asks him, and he replies that his goal in life is to wipe out the entire enemy clan. And she responds, You're either crazy or insane! You know, when I think that maybe these guys weren't entirely taking their job seriously, I think of this one kung fu film in which a trio of drunken, unshaven Japanese martial arts experts are wandering the back roads of feudal China, challenging the local kung fu expert to a duel in order to prove that karate is better than kung fu. And at one point in the movie, they've gotten a local challenger, and the mayor of the town is standing in the middle of the ring and introducing the combatants, and he says, "And in this corner, our champion," whatever his name is, "and in the other corner, our Japanese visitors, Mr. Honda, Mr. Suzuki, and Mr. Toyota." Then there was one called Corrado, Hong Kong Cat. It's one of the only ones I still remember the name of. Corrado is a young man who lives on the beach in a little shack with his dear old mother. And one morning he's out walking along the beach, and he's beset by at least a dozen tough guys who proceed to thrash him. But this being early in the movie, and it's not time for him to appear to lose yet, he beats the tar out of them. And we end up with this shot of Corrado standing triumphantly, surrounded by the limp bodies of his late opponents. And then in the background, the door of the little shack opens up, and Corrado's wizened little old mother comes out the door and waves and says, "Corrado, stop playing with those boys and come inside for your supper." You know, another one of my favorite moments is where the big boss's henchman has gone off to battle with the hero, and the hero completely pounds the shit out of him. We see the big boss's throne room. The boss is sitting up on his throne, and two of his flunkies pull number one henchman in by his arms. The man is covered with blood from head to foot. Every bone in his body is broken. He's out cold. The flunkies drag him up and drop him at the feet of the big boss in a pool of his own blood. And the big boss looks down at him and says, "So, how's it going then?" They don't make him like that anymore. Thank God. At any rate, I hope you enjoyed my little trip down memory lane. And maybe if you have some favorite lines, you'd like to post your own. If this isn't a subject that interests you, well, the only suggestion I have is one that was made in one of those famous kung fu movies, when one of the characters got so angry he was driven to the point of profanity, and pointing at his opponent he said, "You go to hell now."